So thank you, Som, for the interesting presentation. I think you made the case for decentralized ETFs, so the DTFs. I think I'll make the case, or at least provide an overview of the traditional crypto-based ETFs. As Oliver said, I will provide an overview of the US market and legal structure, and Oliver will continue with the EU legal perspectives. I'll start with the explanation of some key terms. DeFi, TradFi, these things can be a little bit disorienting for people who are not regularly active in the crypto community. So I'll cover those things and then go into the overview of security wrapped tokens, what that might be. And as I said, go into the US perspectives, and then Oliver will do EU. So the title of our presentation is Security Wrapped Tokens, Merging DeFi with TradFi. But what do these terms really mean, right? So someone mentioned DeFi. That stands for decentralized finance, maybe a term that many of you are familiar with. It involves blockchain-based applications that enable the use of financial services without the need for any intermediaries. So disintermediation is the key term there. The Reserve Protocol is a great example of a project in the DeFi space. Other examples would be decentralized exchanges like Uniswap, decentralized lending protocols like Aave, or even decentralized stablecoins like the DAI stablecoin, which I believe was recently renamed to Sky. DeFi stands in contrast to TradFi, which is traditional finance. Traditional finance is characterized by a lot of intermediation. So banks, broker-dealers, central clearing counterparties, you name it, the trading, transfer agents, etc. DeFi and TradFi are basically two different aspects of the financial markets. When it comes to wrapped tokens, this actually has a meaning from the crypto industry. Wrapped tokens essentially refers to bridging a crypto asset from one blockchain and making it available for trading on another blockchain. I'll spare you the technical details of how that works. We don't mean wrapped tokens in that sense for the purpose of our presentation, but what we're really referring to when we say security wrapped tokens, we're referring to securitization. It's not really a novel concept. It's been around for a long time, but what we're talking about is taking one or more crypto assets, packaging those into a financial product, a security that can then be traded on the traditional financial markets. And that's why we say merging DeFi with TradFi, because you're taking crypto assets that might exist in the DeFi space and making them available for trading on the in the TradFi, in the traditional financial markets, the product that Soam and Alex were mentioning with Black Manta Capital Partners. And so when we say security wrapped tokens, we're really referring to crypto ETFs, exchange traded funds. In the EU, they're really more referred to as ETPs, exchange traded products, or ETNs, exchange traded notes. They come in different varieties. They can relate to one crypto asset or multiple crypto assets. These days, I think the single crypto assets are a bit more popular. So you have Bitcoin ETFs are extremely popular. There are two flavors. So you have either a spot ETF or a futures ETF. With the spot ETFs, the fund invests directly in Bitcoin and then holds, or not Bitcoin, but any crypto asset, and holds that crypto asset through a custodian. With the futures-based ETFs, the sponsor invests, or the ETF invests in futures contracts based on crypto. And so why would anybody be interested in a security wrapped token? Well, it's mostly for accessing institutional investors, institutional adoption. Crypto can be a very scary place sometimes. There's a lot of high barriers to entry in terms of the technology, with the terminology. And so packaging these products in a security, something that institutional investors are very familiar with from both a trading perspective to tax, to custody. For example, for crypto ETFs, you don't have to custody the crypto yourself. You don't have to worry about losing the private keys to your wallets and go digging through the trash looking for the Bitcoin wallet that you threw away. You can just call up your broker and buy these products as you would any other security. The US market is about the size of $150 billion. It's really increased over the last year. It has a high degree of Bitcoin dominance, particularly Bitcoin spot ETFs, market leaders being BlackRock, Fidelity, and Grayscale. BlackRock in particular is the sponsor of the iShares Bitcoin Trust ETF, which is by far the largest crypto ETF out there, with total assets under management of about $71 billion. That's a spot ETF, and the vast majority of the ETFs in the US market are spot ETFs. They're traded on many exchanges, but then the main ones are NASDAQ and the New York Stock Exchange, ARCA. From a legal perspective, most, if not all, crypto spot ETFs are set up as Delaware statutory trusts, open-ended trusts that allow for the issuance and redemption of shares. Currently, the ETFs are only allowing for cash redemptions, but physical redemptions, so in-kind redemptions of the physical Bitcoin might be coming in the near future. The model was based on the gold ETFs, actually, that came about in the early 2000s. I think around 2001, the SEC approved the first gold ETFs. Actually, I wanted to mention, for comparison, the size of the gold ETF market is about $200 billion. So not quite the size as gold, but getting there, and then maybe someday it will bypass the gold ETF market. Right, so the trust structure is that the trust is established, Bitcoin is acquired by the trust, and then the trust issues shares in beneficial interests in the trust. And so shareholders or investors essentially have a pro rata ownership interest in the pot of crypto that the trust is safeguarding. Because Bitcoin and similar crypto assets do not qualify as securities, rather they qualify as commodities, there's no need for the sponsors to register under the Investment Company Act of 1940. However, the trust shares are securities under US law, and so you do have to register the securities under the Securities Act of 1933. Register with the SEC through the publication of a capital markets prospectus. Those are all available publicly online on the website of the SEC, the Edgar database. If you're looking for some light reading, or if you want to fall asleep, then I can recommend you read those documents. And that's so that's how the trust shares can be offered to the public. But in order for them to be listed on an exchange, the exchange itself actually has to apply to the SEC to allow them to be listed, because they have to apply for any new category of ETF to come onto the market. And the SEC considers a bunch of different factors, one of which is whether there's any fraud and manipulation in the underlying market. And the SEC actually used this as an excuse, or as the primary reason, to reject crypto ETFs for actually quite a long time, alleging that the underlying crypto markets were essentially rife with fraud and market manipulation, and were against the ideals of investor protection that the SEC is mandated to protect. I'll quickly tell the story of the Grayscale Bitcoin Trust because I think it actually really perfectly encapsulates the development of the crypto ETF market in the US. It's been really a decade-long struggle to get crypto ETFs approved by the SEC. And this Grayscale Bitcoin Trust tells the story of it, really. The trust was established in 2013 as a closed-end grantor trust. The reason it was closed-end is because of a lot of regulatory uncertainty in the US. Back then, it was unclear what the regulatory status of Bitcoin and Ether were, whether it was a commodity regulated by the CFTC or a security regulated by the SEC. And so out of an abundance of caution, Grayscale decided to make it a closed-end trust, which had the consequence that redemptions were not allowed. So investors could buy the shares, they could invest, they could get the economic exposure to Bitcoin, but they could never cash out, essentially. This was a huge pain point for the investors. It was actually kind of a blessing for Grayscale itself because their fees were based on amount of assets under management. It was 2%. And so if your investors can't leave, those fees just keep on getting bigger and bigger. But the investors were extremely unhappy. In 2020, Grayscale started voluntarily filing disclosure reports with the SEC to show, goodwill, that they're ready to change into an open-end trust, to be an ETF, to be listed on these markets. In 2021, the SEC approved some crypto futures ETFs. Futures contracts for Bitcoin had been approved a few years earlier by the CFTC, and these crypto futures ETFs were based on those contracts. And so since the SEC approved those, Grayscale thought it could apply to convert its product into an ETF. However, the SEC rejected the application, still claiming that there's the fraud and market manipulation in the underlying crypto markets. Grayscale sued the SEC in federal court in Washington, D.C., and they actually won the case. They argued that the futures markets and the spot markets are based on the same underlying crypto market, and so there was no real rationale for the SEC to approve the futures ETFs, but not the spot ETFs. And so the judge or the court at the Federal Appeals Court in DC agreed and found that the SEC's decision was arbitrary and capricious, which is the standard of review of administrative decisions on review. And so this decision basically forced the SEC's hand with regard to these spot ETFs, and they ended up approving the Grayscale Bitcoin Trust and many other ETFs in 2024, early 2024, I believe. And that really sparked the massive influx of institutional investor funds into these products. Currently, the only two cryptos that have been approved are Bitcoin and Ether, but I believe that other ETFs are on the horizon. The most often discussed ones are XRP, Ripple, Solana, and Dogecoin, surprisingly. So that's something to look forward to, hopefully still within this year. Also on the SEC's agenda is under consideration whether they will allow physical or in-kind redemption of ETFs rather than just cash redemptions. So that's it from the US side, and I'll turn it over to Oliver for the EU perspective.
Thank you very much. I'll try to keep my remarks about the EU legal side of the matter short. What I really find fascinating is, Brian, the story that you told about Grayscale's ETF journey really shows the difference between Europe and the US, because every court decision in the US as precedent really weighs heavy on any future developments. And in the US, you can, with a Supreme Court decision, shape law and direct the development of the country into a specific direction, if you will. And in contrast, in Europe, we don't usually, I mean, not just usually, we do not have this legal system. It's always the legislator that needs to provide the rules that we then try to follow, try to interpret, try to find a way around sometimes. And so what I would like to discuss with you only in a couple of words is basically the two ways of how to connect DeFi with TradFi, or how to connect crypto with the financial markets. And when I say two ways, what I mean is you could on the one hand think of connecting a blockchain-based token, wrap a security around that, and then trade it on the traditional financial markets. But you could also try and do the opposite, namely take your security, wrap a blockchain-based token around it, and then trade it on the DeFi markets. And interestingly enough, both of those are not as difficult as they might seem. If you want to do if you want to take your cryptos and you want to put them on an exchange through securitization, there's basically two ways to do it in Europe. And we heard the name of we heard the name before, the exchange traded product. That's one way to do it. The other would be as a regular funds product. The difference really is whether you collect the tokens or the crypto assets in a specific vehicle. If you do that and the vehicle really becomes the owner of the underlying of the Bitcoin, of the Ether or other crypto assets, then you can try and set it up as a true alternative investment fund product, not as a UCITS fund, simply because it's not securities that the fund is investing in, but you can still do it in a funds model, or which is much less burdensome, you set up these exchange traded notes, which are just debt obligations of an issuer, not necessarily having any regard to the true physical, if you will, underlying. So no need for that to be stored by the issuer of that ETP. That's the one way, getting crypto on the capital markets. The other way, getting financial instruments on the crypto markets, was possible actually. Even so, I was thinking of introducing the European markets in crypto assets regulation, MiCA. And I was going to say, now that we have MiCA, we can also put securities on the blockchain, which is actually not really true, because even before we had MiCA, this was already possible. Back in 2018, the Austrian FMA approved the very first capital market prospectus for a tokenized security, a profit participation right, which was not securitized in a physical paper note or in a digital note that is held by any central clearing counterparty, but rather a blockchain-based token. So it was a security, transferable security in terms of MiFID, but the securitization took place on the blockchain back in 2018. And actually, Brian and I worked on this project. Was the very first in the European Union. So this actually was possible even in the days before MiCA. What has now come as an additional option under MiCA is the so-called asset reference token. Asset reference token is a crypto asset that purports to maintain a stable value in relation to other values or rights. And this is really broadly defined. And also, if you set up or if you issue a crypto asset that maintains through various mechanisms, which I'm not going to go into detail now, but if you issue such a crypto asset, it maintains a stable value, for example, in relation to the S&P 500 index, you can actually structure it as a native crypto asset under MiCA, which is fully regulated and actually, which now allows, through Article 60 MiCA, which now allows the traditional institutional players to utilize and to issue. So it's not just the instruments of the classical financial market that the traditional financial markets players can access through MiCA and through Article 60. It's all of these new instruments, such as the asset reference tokens. Yeah. And what else do I have on this slide? What I can tell you is the European market is much smaller still than the US market. We have around market capitalization of 12 billion euros in comparison to the 150 we saw. Market leaders are CoinShare, Bitwise, 21 shares. If you look through how the structure or how these instruments are structured, it's mostly ETPs. So one of the two options that I told you. And here are the legal bases that you need to consider if you want to set this up. And yeah, and perhaps just one more word to this slide. I firmly believe that on the traditional financial markets as well as in the DeFi space, there's people who know a lot and there's people who know little. And this does not only concern, how the technology works and so forth, but there's generally this information asymmetry in the market. And so I'm really in favor of the rules that we have to address the retail market. And usually those rules basically state, inform the customer of what you're doing, inform the customer of what you're selling. The capital markets prospectus is the instrument that was developed on the traditional financial markets. The white paper is the instrument that was developed in the crypto space. We now have a law, the MiCA. We now have an act that clearly states what should be included in the white paper, what information is considered necessary for people to form an informed investment decision. And just wanted to point out that obligations to inform your investors in the retail markets are comparatively strong now in the crypto space than they are in the traditional financial markets. Right, I already talked about the asset reference tokens and the white paper requirements. And yeah, that was my short EU aspect of our presentation. Thanks so much for your time. That's the contact details if you want to stay in touch with us. Brian is happy to answer also US questions, but also EU questions. I limit myself to the EU part. Thanks so much. Looking forward to mingling with you now.